We are talking today to Cyrena Wages from Memphis, Tennessee. She's talking to us from her home, and we are recording this in London, England. We're going to talk in our first session here about really your sort of inspiration. So last time, if people have not heard the last episode, we talked a lot about your first album, Vanity Project. We also talked a little bit about the music that you're working on right now, and you've started releasing this year as well. But I thought it would be nice to get a bit more into the background, some of your inspiration, some of your other experiences. And a couple of things that I noticed that you've talked about over the last year or so, and various things that you've put out on socials as well. I've got a list of these here. The first question I have for you is a very short question. What is music for the River Fairies, Cyrena Wages?
Yes. Okay, so I grew up in Millington, just north of downtown Memphis. Very country little town. And so basically, if you follow the river north from downtown, you get to Millington, and it's about a 20-minute drive. So the river was always really important to me. We would go to the Shelby Forest entrance. My godparents lived over there. And so there was always sort of this folklore, mystical idea of the river and all that it contained. My dad would tell me like wild stories growing up of, the river fairies and of all the special creatures out there. He would take me on scavenger hunts and hide little pieces of treasure that he would say were left from, this particular river fairy or this whatever guy, and it was really just a beautiful, imaginative childhood thing that I was in awe of. And then later in life, actually, my friend Matthew Burdine is a river guide. And he took me out one day across the Mississippi at night and at sunset. This is like a new thing that his company has been doing here in Memphis. But he took me over to the banks and showed me just sort of the perspective of Memphis looking from that part of the river on at Memphis, where you otherwise couldn't get if you weren't on, kayak or canoe. And anyways, and we sat out there talking about what kind of music I make and what I'm trying to do with all this and how this music doesn't even make sense to me, how it's country and it's rock and roll and it's indie and it's alt songwriter. And it's all these things that the industry has told me for years to distill into a more packageable box. And that's been really impossible for me. And so we were kind of cracking jokes about how it's just music for the river fairies. And that kind of stuck. And here we are. I ended up shooting my album cover for Vanity Project at that exact same little spot on the banks in Mississippi. So
That is such a cool story. I know that photograph so well.
yeah.
And there's some video footage where you're sort of setting it up as well. I mean, it looks from the angle, it looks like the beach, but obviously it's the riverbank, or the river sand. That's a really nice story, isn't it? Fairies, childlike thing. But I remember it's also partly this feeling that perhaps you have to package music and you have to signpost what genre it is. I mean, in other words, in the old days, which section of the record shop would you find it in?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was stressed about that the whole time we were making it because I was concerned that this song had a little dose of like my 90s soul influence, the stuff I like kind of grew up on. And then this song over here was straight up country soul. And this one was like, and that stress, this one was Christopherson and this is Joni Mitchell. And a lot of the things were in contrast. And my producer, Matt, and Joe, and everyone in our group just kept saying your voice and your story and your narrative are the through line. I was actually talking to Joe about an hour ago on the topic of like, where would you fit in a record store? Well timed for our chat this morning. So Joe Restiva, who we've spoken about in the past interview, who was my sort of musical director and co-writer on Vanity Project, he's like one of my favorite people in the world, but he takes no shit, right? Like he's the least agreeable person I've ever met in my life. And I hope he listens to this. I'll know. This is a test, Joe, if you listen to this. No, just kidding. But he, I'll be like, I really love this song. Could we make something like this? And he'll be like, honestly, that sounds like shit to me, or else it'll be more interesting of a response than that. But I was sending him some stuff and he was like, nah, man, this just seems like somebody who's like kind of a packaged person and model who's like trying to add to a brand. This doesn't sound like it's from anywhere. And that was such an aha. And then he started sending me some counters to that of things that sound like they are from somewhere. And so that opened my eyes as I'm starting to plot what the next things I write and record sound like. As he said, make it sound like Millington. That's where you're from. And nobody else can do that. He goes, nobody's from anywhere, but you're from there, and in this AI world, so much is changing and so much is just like plugged in and repeated. And so that really was like a nice little aha that I had right before this chat. But then also, fairies, the way that I spell it is the FAE, which is like the slightly witchy version, right? And that tug of war between wholesomeness and edge is something that I really resonate with. And so there's a lot in there. I gave you a lot in all that, but yeah.
Joe sounds cool. I've seen him in some of your documentaries and stuff, and he's almost like he could be from Yorkshire. He's quite a dry guy, quite like you say, quite direct, which is what
Incredibly.
you want. You don't want a lot of people around you just going, "Yeah, that's amazing, great," all the time.
Absolutely. I'm highly sensitive, and so I can be knocked down, but I would much prefer direct with a follow up that adds more nuance. Don't patronize me. I'm smart enough to like pick up on that. But also, when people are overtly direct but don't have a follow up of insight, Joe typically comes to this on his own accord or with a little nudging comes to this. But I wanted to be offended by me sharing this piece of music with him that I was basically saying, can you help me write the next project? And can this be an inspiration for it? And he's like, yeah, this is kind of bogus, right? And so I wanted to have my feelings hurt and be defensive. But then he's like, because this is what you could actually do, which is just so brilliant. And I need that in my life and in my creative journey. So
I'm going to change direction because you've set me up for another question about where people are from and locations and so on. But do you think that what you get from people like Joe and Matt Ross Spang and so on, is that sort of representing the band? So you don't have a band at the moment, you're on your own. I can imagine in a band environment, there would be a lot of back and forth ideas. There's 4 or 5 people there, all with their own ideas. You've got a lot of pressure there on you, haven't you? Do you feel that that sort of deflects pressure and helps you to understand where you're going with a song or an album, to have those trusted guys in the room?
yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. It's been a mix of different setups since I started this part of my career. But when we made Vanity Project, I don't have a Cyrena wages and the somethings, I don't have that. I don't have a branded contracted band, but I sort of had a handshake deal of a band in that my guys were my guys. My first call guys were my first call guys. And we did develop like a little bit of a family. I actually not sure I realized it in the moment, but afterwards hearing them say, well, hey, are you going to call me for this or whatever? I feel like we're a family. Like I want to be a part of this. That surprised me. It's like what I wanted the whole time, but I guess I didn't know they were having that experience while making that record with me. But yeah, making a Vanity Project and having that input, like I can defer a lot. And it's not because I don't have my own ideas, but it's because I think I'm pretty good at putting people around me who are experts at their own thing. I like to say, help me here. Here's not where my strength lies, and I really, really loved that process. I probably came across too meek at some moments when making Vanity Project, but I don't know. That's how I really felt comfortable showing up, and now it's shifted a little bit. I made the second record, as you know, so differently with pretty much just my producer and co-writers and then several fantastic musicians who we hired to send in tracks from their studios. But the producer was really directing all of that. It was much less like live tracking in studio collaborative effort. And there's no right or wrong way. It's just 2 totally different ways to do it. And I think you get 2 different products that are so badass in their own right and have strengths that the other don't have. But yeah, and then when it gets back to just like getting back to my brand and my career, it's all on me. I don't have anybody. So that is a lot to shoulder. And I'm actively looking for someone to help quarterback this with me. Not just anyone, but the right person, the right fit.
It's cool to have that. We talked about artistic control last time, and we talked about the benefits, the positives of that. We glossed over the negatives, and I think surely one of them is that the pressure there's nowhere to go, right? It's all on you. But I think what you're saying there is that you found the right guys and girls to help that. I know you've got quite a large network in Memphis. You'd expect that after 30 odd years. But about Memphis and about this thing about, your perspective, almost like maybe defining you as an artist by where you're from, and not just Memphis, but to you, of course, Millington, which people like me never heard of. We've just about heard of Memphis. And that reminds me of my hometown, where it's really, I've written down here that it's in the arse end of nowhere. The only place you can go east of where I'm from is Holland. It's literally on the edge of everything. It's on a massive river, much wider river than the Tennessee River, not longer. The only reason you would be in that area is to go to my hometown. And of course, I'm from a suburb there. I'm from the west, not the north, but it's really the middle of nowhere. And what that means is that the people who do end up there tend to be quite interesting.
Mm-hmm,
Some of
mm-hmm.
them come for work originally. The guy I sent you this poem, Philip Larkin, he ended up there because he was a librarian at the university, a very specific thing. And he spent his whole life in Hull after that. He's written about it. And he was a very famous poet in his lifetime and still is today. It was only when I left that town that I started to think, well, if Larkin can make a career based out of Hull, and then there was a band there called the Beautiful South, started by the guys who were the House Martins, and one of the guys was Fatboy Slim, you might have heard of, quite a famous DJ here.
Yeah.
They had a massive successful band in Hull singing about Hull and mentioning the places that we grew up in. And you start to build this thinking that actually I thought it was the end of the road when I lived there. But when you leave, you get a different perspective. And there's a guy from nearby called Alan Bennett who was famous in Beyond the Fringe, and he knew Dudley Moore and those sort of people in the 60s. And he became one of our most famous playwrights. And he said, I only realized what Leeds, which is still Yorkshire, was after I'd left and I'd been away for 10 or 15 or 20 years. Now I feel like I can write about that town. And it's a roundabout way of saying that I think all of us are from somewhere. And if you're from a massive place like New York or London, then maybe there's less of a thing around it. But if you're from somewhere that's really out on the edge of something, that does give you a unique perspective, even if you don't realize it.
You're so right.
And maybe that's what's coming through. So you've got the picture of the river on the album. A lot of the songs mention Memphis, mention the river, mentioned the state, mention places around. You talked about Shelby Forest a little bit. Maybe that album is about place, and maybe the next one's not so much. What do you think about the next one? What's the theme there in terms of location?
Yeah, it's not as specific in place geographically. It's specific in place interpersonally. And that space was one that needed to be emboldened by sort of this persona that no one could touch. Its place is certainly in between the ears and not on land per se. But there are, of course, the producer Johnny Black drew from so many records that he was a gigantic fan of. And the differences that he and Amy, our other co-writer, and myself have in perspective from where we're from certainly make this very interesting melting pot of a sound and of a storyline. But yeah, it's so different. It's so different. And then you start thinking about the next one, right? And everything is like, I feel like every creative project is a bit of a call and response from the one before. You know, it's just like this, it's not a tug of war, but it's this constant chipping away at this beast in hopes that as you figure out how to do music, you also figure out how to do your life. And I always say that. Like, I remember having a chat with my therapist one time and saying, you know, God, I spend 110% of my energy in my music or in things that are adjacent to my music career. And I just feel like I'm just like giving away all of my time to this almost impossible journey. And she said, but it's not in vain. This journey to tackle this career is teaching you how to live your life, teaching you how to be human.
It so is. It resonates with me. I'm seeing in my own situation. People wonder why I spent 40 years writing. And that's not actually the case if you look at it. Some people say, there's a famous quote, but it's a kind of obvious thing to say, that if you're feeling inspired, you write. And if you're not feeling inspired, you read. And so in your case, you might listen to other tunes to get inspiration. If you just can't get the energy together to write something, you put the music of somebody else on. It's an obvious thing to say, but what that means in practice is I only spend about half my time writing. If you're writing nonfiction, I'm looking over at my stack of Fleetwood Mac books there. If you're writing nonfiction, you have to read about 100 books just to write one book anyway. So that is my way of saying that I think I learn about life. I think writing is my therapy. I think that's how I learn about myself and about the world around me. I want to talk about your inspirations a bit more. And I do want to ask you about Amy Winehouse. So what can you tell me? What do you know? How did you find Amy?
God, I think like most great music that I got into, my oldest brother Houston, who's also a musician, I think he probably turned me on to Amy. And I don't even remember how old when I first fell in love with her, but I definitely remember like where I was when the news of her passing came to the States. And man, that Back to Black record is like, I think arguably one of the best records ever. I just thought we just didn't get enough of her, you know? Like I can't. I just want to know her story. And now she's not Earthside, so like I can only know that, which I can just like draw my own conclusions from as I continue to listen to that record and the work she put out before that. But man, the way she was both fierce and shameless, but also so delicate. It's like nobody could fuck with her, and also you could break her real easy at the same time. But I don't think it was a front. It wasn't like she was putting on this front. It was that those dualities lived within her. And this is just my sort of like hypothesis about who really knows who the real girl is and was. But that's one of the things that as I've unpacked what she meant to me over the years, I resonate with that. And then also just her vocal tone. I mean, there was so much pain that was equally mixed with swagger. And I remember like different times in my life, it's still today, people will say sometimes my voice is weird sounding, you know, like it has a weird quality. And maybe that's true. You know, I don't know what weird means, right? Everything's so subjective, but I kind of like that, you know. And when I listen to Amy Winehouse, like there's a flavor there. There's a bite and like a vowel shape that's like she's not doing it to sing well. She's doing it because that's the expression of like
Mm.
this wild passion in her gut. That's how it came out of her mouth, you know, and she let it. And it has this bite to it. And it's just like, and then of course the writing and the record and the production is just insane. But man, what a mega powerhouse. I would give, like, if I could have dinner with one person who passed before me, it's 100% probably going to be her. I have so many questions, you know. But an artist like Amy, like that's a great, I'm glad you brought her up because when I, to your point a minute ago, when I lose my own inspiration, if I return to listen to something to refill that well, listening to somebody like her would restore my soul if it's feeling shaky about this career journey because it just, it takes it out of it being a career, and it reminds me that it's like this precious important piece of art and life, and it's not about the industry, it's about this woman's raw story and expression of that. And like that is why I do this. Cyrena, remind yourself, you know, get back to the basics, baby. Man, I'm a huge fan. Are you a fan? How do
Oh
y'all?
yeah, yeah. I mean, everybody is. I mean, I'll give you my perspectives on her. So I'm trying to think about the dates and stuff. But you'd be a similar age. Maybe she's a little bit older than you, but not much.
I was in, I want to say, because she was 27 when she passed. I want to say I was in
Mm.
high school. So we're not far off. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so she was a big figure. I think she just made two albums, but
Mm.
she she was just. I can't remember a time when we didn't know about Amy Winehouse, but obviously she came onto the scene a little bit later. It would have been, I want to say 2000 or something like that ish. I think everybody remembers the first time they see or hear her because she not only had that voice, but she had that beehive look and the very sort of 50s look, I'm going to say, and a very jazzy style. So it
Mhm.
wasn't the sort of music that teenagers or especially girls would have chosen, I don't think, until she came along. If you had that style of music sung by somebody else, it wouldn't have had the impact. I think there's something about her life story, her sound, her look that just kind of grabbed people's attention.
Mm.
But it was obvious. I can remember a morning actually. I was driving to work, and it was when she'd been in rehab or something, one of the many times, and her dad was on radio on the news, and that was my first indication that her addictions and so on were getting out of control. And he was on the news, basically saying to the journalists, "Stop trying to talk about Amy Winehouse. You're not doing her any favors." And I could tell then, this was 4 or 5 years before she died, that there was a lot else going on that even the tabloids hadn't got to. And
Mm.
she was getting into a position with her partner at the time who was quite well known, and some of the friends she was hanging out with, that she was getting out of reach to the people around her who were her family, and she was in a dangerous place. But I remember the news. It was on a Saturday evening when the news came on that she died, and everybody was like, "Oh God!" And then we were like, "Well, was it a surprise? Really? It wasn't a surprise." So we'd seen every chapter of her life story in slow motion. And they say about the 27 Club, a lot of people die at 27 who are in the music business. I don't know why that would be. I think it's just a coincidence, but there's a few, but there's probably 100 people who didn't die at 27,
Sure,
or
sure.
1,000, but there's something about this 27 Club. But I wanted to ask if you've seen any of the recent films about her. So there's like biopics and so on about Amy's life.
I was just thinking about that actually. I forget which one it was, but one of them, it might have just been Amy, but it was one of the ones where at the end, it's an incredible jazz artist, and I'm confusing my different documentaries, but there was a quote at the end talking about Amy. It said, I think if you live long enough, life teaches you how to live it. And
Mm.
that has stuck with me. Yeah, I don't know, but I was also kind of like thinking about what you were just saying about those years of sort of having a better perspective on like her and who her circle was and kind of the trouble she was into. Like, I don't know that all that messaging was as available in the States. Maybe it was, but I was young and I wasn't able to
Mm.
find it. But like, I sometimes think about humans as old souls or young souls. I don't know if you think about it like that. Like, I call it sometimes first timers, like the new souls. And it's not saying that I believe like reincarnation is per se the gospel. Like, I don't. Like, I'm getting really woo woo here, but it is interesting to me to think about like that person's a first timer, or like that person has lived a couple lives and showed up with a weight
Uh-huh.
that was too heavy. And I don't know which one it is, right? Like, I don't know if she was a first timer who came out with too much energy for that baby soul, or if she was carrying the burden and the pain of like many previous lifetimes. And because the depth that she was singing from, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the touch point with like consciousness. And I mean, I don't know, the 27 Club, like one of the you're right, obviously it's sort of silly in that look at the number of people who definitely didn't die at 27. But I don't know, there's something about, I mean, us creative types, you I don't know if you relate to this. I don't want to throw you into the same box I'm about to throw myself into, but it's a little wild up here, and it's dark.
Oh yeah.
There's not a man or woman that I've ever been in close relationship with who hasn't probably been like, whoa, you're a lot for me right now. And I think that, I don't know, artists just, the way that we internalize and digest information and then carry it around before we're able to put it out into something else that lives outside of us, like there's a weight and there's an existential euphoria and dread at the same time. And then like you couple that with the late 20s, which I do think are the most confusing
Mm.
of all years. They're often the most self-destructive just in and of
Mm.
themselves. If you're like a bit self-destructive and you're super heady and emotional, I mean, it's a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah.
I feel
So one of the things I love talking to you about is just how much you think about things, and you've just fired off about 5 amazing ideas that I need to try and. This thing about the old.
it's exhausting though. I don't want to be like this. I also sometimes, as I say something out loud, I'm like, that probably tracks to normal people as like word salad, like emotion salad, like just like, bleh, you know. But for me, that's just like what my brain is actually processing.
So you said about old souls and young souls. Nobody ever says young souls, but there must be something like that. I don't know whether it's. I mean, you could say about this about Amy. I know you find it flattering when I compare you to Amy Winehouse, but there are similarities in this, in the tone and the hair and the look and the 50s thing that you've got going on there as well. There are similarities, which is crazy because she's from Camden, which you may never have been to. It's kind of like a very hippie bohemian part of London. But Camden Locks and Camden Markets, the scenery there is quite famous in films and so on. But she's from London, and not many people are from London. Most of us move there for work. She is of Camden, and that's why the statue's there that I sent that picture. And you realize how tiny she was when you see that. She was not a big person physically. She just had this enormous soul, let's say. You sing in a way about things that, and I just wonder if it's just the fact that singers, you kind of get going very young. You might start when you're 5 or 6 with school and singing lessons and stuff, and by your teen years, you were sort of getting into being a musician and looking at that as a career, I think. And certainly in your early 20s, you were there doing it at a very young age, really. And I wonder if part of the fact that you come across as being very wise and experienced is just because you started young. You didn't start your career when you were 25. You started it when you were, I'm going to say, 15 or 16. Does that give you a head start on people around you? I feel like all of the musicians that I listened to this year seem about 50 in terms of their life experience, but they're all about 20, 25, and there's a mismatch between their age and their wisdom.
Mm.
We said at the beginning, what's time? What's age? You're sort of implying an age within the universe that's different to the birth date.
I do really think of it that way. And like, I hold everything really lightly because it's all half baked in my mind. But and my dad always makes a joke. He'll always say, well, she was born 20. He's very Southern. He just means that he makes that joke often because my romantic partner has several years on me. It's funny because of course, when I was a kid, I didn't want to hang out with the kids. I wanted to hang out with my parents' friends. The friends would bring their kids over to play with me, and I'd be like, I'm good. I want to chat with the big folks, I've always been like that. And in college, I'd visit friends and I'd want to wake up and have coffee with their parents the next morning after a night of partying, and it was like, came across a bit weird.
Ah.
I've always been like that. And even now, like I'm not a big social gal. But yeah, I think both and I'm an old soul. I always have been. It's exhausting to me and to others. I think the underbelly parts of it. But I also, I did get into music so early and that taught me so much. But something kind of unfortunate, I think, happened to me that I got like lucky having some natural skill and some parents who were like ready and capable of supporting it, right? When I was in middle school, I mean, I started singing when I was 5, but by middle school, 6th grade, I was able to like sort of compete at the high school level and excel a little bit. I remember the first like competition that I won and I beat, I think, no, that it was an 8th grader. I beat the high schoolers. That's what it was. That was at about, 13. And it backfired on me because the pressure I felt, not from anyone but myself, but the pressure I felt to live up to that became quite crippling to me. And I did an interesting thing that I still don't understand, which is I didn't take that pressure and then start working really, really, really hard. I took that pressure and I internalized it as this very pass fail thing for me. Like the fear of not being as good as I wanted myself to become was so crippling that I sort of had to avoid the technical work that could get me to that success. It's like avoiding the things that are most important to you, but sort of like still pursuing it and hoping those things show up. It's like it took a very weird spin for me. And so that started like, I don't know, a 10-year journey of like low self-esteem, like still definitely in the pursuit. And then in my early 20s in the business, but it was almost like I became really good at the business side of things. I knew how to put a team together, put a band together, find opportunities for us. It was like I was the artist caricature and I was also the manager and handler for everything else around the career. But like I wasn't practicing because the thing that's most important to me is that I was a fantastic singer and artist and writer who could live up to that natural talent of that little girl. But the unknown in that, whether or not I could live up to that, was so destabilizing to me at the time that I couldn't even look at it. So it was like very weird. Like I think it should have set me up to accelerate me years beyond other people, but it set me back. And then I had to come in my late 20s and go like, wait a second, let me hone my craft a bit more. Let me stop producing events where I book my band and everyone else's band, those things that feel like success that I can handle with my mind
Oh, uh-huh.
because no one's going to outwork me. But when it came to this precious baby thing, like my vocal ability or my story being communicated in a way, that was something so vulnerable that it wasn't until my late 20s that I had enough sense of self and therapy to go like, okay, I can look at this little thing. This was the source all along, but she got too scary, you know.
What a story. I've learned quite a lot in that section because I knew about the beauty pageants. I didn't know about the singing competitions. Yeah, there's something that I was always bored by children of my own age. And I just think it's a funny thing, isn't it? I've always felt middle-aged, even in my teens. You know, I did a lot of reading and stuff. And the funny thing is for me that everybody, so Holly's a music town, everybody in my life was into music. My best friend across the road was in a band with my brother. My now wife was in a quite a big whole band for a while when she was 18. So she was quite a young singer, her and a friend. They made demos and stuff. And the House Martins used to record in a studio down the road in a house near us. Everybody, and I was not the music person. I can play guitar, but I didn't ever really play in a band. I was always just writing my stories in the background. But now I'm the only one of those people who's remotely involved in the music business, and it's somewhat tangential. I turned out to be writing about it. But there's something about just, I think I stopped seeing my writing as a career or as a business very early on because there was some, we talked about this last time, there was something in me and most people where you see what's required and you go, no fucking way, it's too much. I know exactly what to do and I'm not interested. I see that now as being lucky because if you look at people who were successful back then, people like Will Self, who's now gone a little bit strange, but his books back then in the 90s were very, very interesting books, totally original voice. And he said something like, if I was starting now, I couldn't make a living as a writer. We were talking about middle class creatives last time. People like him can't get started now. And the average age of a male debut novelist in the UK used to be about 40. It's probably about 50 now. It's not you can't have a career that starts when you're 50, right? How do you live 50 years to get there? So I went off to work. So my 20s were in London working. The writing was just something I did in hotels when we were on projects and quietly just finishing stuff off. I kept it an absolute secret. And I knew I felt like I would never make money at it. That took a lot of pressure off because then you really know, honestly, that you're writing because you like writing. You're not writing for anything else. You don't even know whether anyone's going to read it. You don't have that safety valve. You're like, full send. This is who I am. It's what I do. And it's how I make my money. And I realized that if I was sat having to write to pay my mortgage, I would shit a brick and not finish anything. So unless you've got a partner or a family member or somebody who can pay your way, I was terrified of having to write a novel that was going to maintain my lifestyle. Now I don't care who reads it. You have to be very determined to want that. And when you talk about it as a career, I saw a little clip with Dan Reeder a few weeks ago where he said, look, if you're thinking about this as a money-making machine, your thought process is totally wrong. You have to do it because you like it. And if you make money, then lucky you. But it's hard. It's hard, isn't it?
It's so hard. And God, I wish I could flip that script. I mean, I'm unpacking it with you right now, live time. Like, I don't have it worked out. There's something that I've been doing. I won't say that I've been doing wrong, but there's a reset that the universe is asking me for or inviting me to. And like, it might be reframing something like what Reader said. But it's so hard. I mean, what propelled me for all of my 20s was that when we were kids growing up, so my two older brothers, they both played music as well. My oldest is very musical, but they're also actors. They went to acting school in New York and they're writers and they're filmmakers and all the things, right? And my parents are like, God, can't one of y'all get a real job, you know? But when we were growing up in Millington, the three of us, they're much older than I am, but we would always say, all right, when we get famous, we're gonna buy Dad a Cadillac. Dad, what color Cadillac do you want? Mom, we're going to buy, she liked the Cadillacs, but the new ones, like the sedan Cadillac. So she wanted a bright red one that looked like red wine, and Dad wanted like a crazy 60s hot pink Cadillac. And like being able to give something to our parents that was luxury after all we feel like they have given to us and all the sacrifices they made for us, like being able to take them on crazy vacation, like these things that lived in our minds that still live in our minds that we haven't attained yet, you know? But that propelled us in this like super intense way. Or for myself, anyways, I think they would both say the same thing if they were sitting here. We were set out to save the family. Like it's the best thing ever. And also, maybe it could have been checked a little bit so that that pressure didn't distract us from honing the most important parts of our craft, like this self-induced pressure. It wasn't like our parents were like, you better go be superstar. You know, it wasn't like that at all. They just wanted us to have the lives we wanted to have. But we all felt this camaraderie and like, we got to make it. And I don't think it's gone yet. It's definitely not gone for me. But yeah, trying to mature that perspective, keep that fire, because you got to have that killer instinct. And you got to be nuts. You said something last time we talked, not on air. You said something like, we're all like a little bit mad to like dream of this, but there's only some people who are mad enough to actually try it. Is that what you said? Something of that?
That's good enough. That sounds good to me.
And it made me laugh so hard because it's like blasphemous that, you know, that it's like the same as like trying to be in the NBA.
Thank you to Cyrena Wages for appearing on the show this week.
Thanks for having me.
You can follow her on socials, on Instagram and TikTok, and you can buy her music on her own website. And she is also available on all of the usual streaming services. That's all for this time. See you next time.